Hello and welcome to the second part of the butterfly line. We left it last week where our main character had a chance encounter with an old lady and she's about to take him on an amazing adventure to South Africa. I'm going to find out all about her son Bertie too. So the title of the chapter, Timbavity. I think that's how you pronounce it. So Bertie was born in South Africa in a remote farmhouse near a place called Timbavity. It was shortly after Bertie first started to walk that his mother and father decided a fence must be put around the farmhouse to make a compound where Bertie could play in safety. It wouldn't keep the snakes out, nothing could do that, but at least Bertie would be safe now from the leopards and the lions and the spotted hyenas. Enclosed within the compound were the lawn and gardens at the front of the house and the stables and barns at the back. All the room a child would need or want, you might think, but not Bertie. The farm stretched as far as the eye could see in all directions, 20,000 acres of veld. Bertie's father farmed cattle, but times were hard. The rains had failed too often and many of the rivers and waterholes had all but dried up. With fewer wildebeest and impaler to prey on, the lions and leopards would sneak up to the cattle whenever they could. So Bertie's father was more often than not away from home with his men guarding the cattle. Every time he left, he'd say the same thing. Don't you ever open that gate, Bertie, you hear me? There's lions out there, leopards, elephants, hyenas. You stay put, you hear? Bertie would stand at the fence and watch him ride out, and he would be left behind with his mother, who was also his teacher. There were no schools for 100 miles, and his mother too was always warning him to stay inside the fence. Look what happened in Pete and the Wolf, she would say. His mother was often sick with malaria, and even when she wasn't sick, she'd be listless and sad. There were good days when she would play the piano for him and play hide and seek around the compound, or he'd sit on her lap on the sofa out on the veranda and she'd just talk and talk. All about her home in England, about how much she hated the wildness and the loneliness of Africa, and about how Bertie was everything to her. But they were rare days. Every morning he'd climb into her bed and snuggle up to her, hoping against hope that today she'd be well and happy. But so often she wasn't, and Bertie would be left on his own again to his own devices. There was a waterhole downhill from the farmhouse and some distance away. That waterhole, when there was water in it, became Bertie's whole world. He would spend hours in the dusty compound, his hands gripping the fence, looking out at the wonders of the veld. I'll take a picture of it. That's what he's looking at. Some of the animals can see the giraffe. At the giraffes. Drinking, spread-legged at the waterhole, at the browsing impaler, tails twitching alert, at the waterhogs snorting and snuffling under the shade of the shungai trees, at the baboons, the zebras, the wildebeest and the elephants bathing in the mud. But the moment Bertie always longed for was when a pride of lions came padding out of the veld. The impaler would be the first to spring away. Then the zebra would panic and gallop off. Within seconds, the lions would have the waterhole to themselves and they would crouch to drink. From the safe haven of the compound, Bertie looked and learned as he grew up. By now he could climb the tree by the farmhouse and sit high in its branches. He could see better from up there. It would wait for the lions for an hour. He got to know the life of the waterhole so well that he could feel the lions were out there, even before he saw them. Bertie had no friends to play with, but he always said he was never lonely as a child. At night, he loved reading his books and losing himself in his stories. And by day, his heart was out in the veld with the animals. That was where he yearned to be. Whenever his mother was well enough, he would beg her to take him outside the compound, but her answer was always the same. I can't, Bertie, your father has forbidden it, she'd say. And that was that. The men would come home with their stories of the veld, of the family of cheetahs sitting like sentinels on the cop, of the leopard they had spotted high in his tree, larder watching over his kill, of the hyenas they had driven off, of the herd of elephants which had stampeded the cattle. And Bertie would listen wild-eyed, agog. Again and again he asked his father if he could go with him to help guard the cattle. His father just laughed, patted his head and said it was man's work. He did teach Bertie how to ride, and how to shoot too, but always within the confines of the compound. Week in, week out, Bertie had to stay behind his fence. He made up his mind, though, that if no one would take him out into the veld, then one day he would go by himself. But something always held him back. Perhaps it was one of those tales he'd been told of black mamba snakes whose bite would kill you within 10 minutes, of hyenas whose jaws would crunch you to bits, of vultures who would finish off anything that was left so that no one would ever find even the bits. For the time being, he stayed behind the fence, but the more he grew up, the more his compound became a prison to him. One evening, Bertie must have been about 6 years old by now. He was sitting high up in the branches of his tree, hoping against hope that the lions might come down for their sunset drink, as they often did. He was thinking of giving up, for it would soon be too dark to see much now, when he saw a solitary lioness coming down to the waterhole. Then he saw that she was not alone. Behind her, and on unsteady legs, came what looked like a lion cub, but it was white, glowing white in the gathering gloom of dusk. You can just about see the picture. I think if I hold it close enough, you can see the mum and the white tiger behind. While the lioness drank, the cub played at catching her tail, and then when she had her fill, the two of them slipped away into the long grass and were gone. Bertie ran inside, screaming with excitement. He had to tell someone, anyone. He found his father working at his desk. "Impossible," said Father. "You're seeing things that aren't there. Or you're telling fibs. One of the two." "I saw him, I promise," Bertie insisted. But his father would have none of it, and sent him to his room for arguing. His mother came to see him later. "Anyone can make a mistake, Bertie dear," she said. "It must have been the sunset. It plays tricks with your eyes sometimes. There's no such thing as a white lion." The next evening, Bertie watched again at the fence, but the white lion cub and the lioness did not come. Nor did they the next evening, nor the next. Bertie began to think he must have been dreaming it. A week or more passed, and then there had been only a few zebras and wildebeest down at the waterhole. Bertie was already upstairs in his bed when he heard his father riding into the compound, and then the stamp of his heavy boots on the veranda. We got her, he was saying. "Huge lioness, massive she was. She's taken half a dozen of my best cattle in the last 2 weeks. Well, she won't be taking any more." Bertie's heart stopped. In that one terrible moment, he knew which lioness his father was talking about. There could be no doubt about it. His white lion cub had been orphaned. "But what if," Bertie's mother was saying, "what if she had young ones to feed? Perhaps they were starving." "So would we be if we let it go on. We had to shoot her," his father retorted. Bertie lay there all night listening to the plaintive roaring echoing through the veld, as if every lion in Africa was sounding a lament. He turned his face into his pillow and could think of nothing but the orphaned white cub, and he promised himself there and then that if ever the cub came down to the waterhole looking for his dead mother, then he would do what he had never dared to do. He would open the gate and go out and bring him home. He would not let him die out there all alone. But no lion cub came to this waterhole. All day, every day, he waited for him to come, but he never came. Okay, next chapter, Bertie and the lion. One morning, a week or so later, Bertie was woken by a chorus of urgent neighing. He jumped out of his bed and ran to the window. A herd of zebras was scattering away from the waterhole, chased by a couple of hyenas. Then he saw more hyenas, 3 of them standing stock still, noses pointing, eyes fixed on the waterhole. It was only now that Bertie saw the lion cub, but this one wasn't white at all. He was covered in mud, with his back to the waterhole, and he was waving a pathetic paw at the hyenas, who were beginning to circle. The lion cub had nowhere to run to, and the hyenas were siding ever closer. Bertie was downstairs in a flash, leaping off the veranda and racing barefoot across the compound, shouting at the top of his voice. He threw open the gate and charged down the hill towards the waterhole, yelling and screaming and waving his arms like a wild thing. Startled at the sudden intrusion, The hyenas turned tail and ran, but not far. Once within range, Bertie hurled a broadside of pebbles at them and they ran off again, but again, not far. Then he was at the waterhole between the lion cub and the hyenas, shouting at them to go away. They didn't. They stood and watched, uncertain for a while. Then they began to circle again. Closer, closer. That was when the shot rang out. The hyenas bolted into the long grass and were gone. When Bertie turned round, he saw his mother in her nightgown, rifle in hand, running towards him down the hill. Okay, here's a nice picture. So it's Bertie trying to chase away the hyenas, and then there's the little lion cub. Very muddy. He had never seen her run before. Between them they had gathered up the mud-matty cub and brought him home. He was too weak to struggle, though he tried. As soon as they had given him some warm milk, they dunked him in the bath to wash him. As the first of the mud came off, Bertie saw he was white underneath. "You see," he cried triumphantly, "he is white, he is. I told you, didn't I? He's my white lion." His mother still could not believe her eyes. 5 baths later, she had to. They sat him down by the stove in a washing basket and fed him again. All the milk he could drink, and he drank the lot. Then he lay down and slept. He was still asleep when Bertie's father got back at lunchtime. They told him how it all happened. "Please, father, I want to keep him," Bertie said. "And so do I," said mother. "We both do." And she spoke as Bertie had never heard her speak before, her voice strong and determined. Bertie's father didn't seem to know quite how to reply. He just said, "We'll talk about it later," and then he walked out. They did talk about it later when Bertie was supposed to be in bed. He wasn't though. He heard them arguing. He was outside the sitting room door watching and listening. His father was pacing up and down. "He'll grow up, you know," he was saying. "You can't keep a grown lion, you know that." "And you know we can't just throw him out to the hyenas," replied his mother. "He needs us, and maybe we need him. He'll be something for Bertie to play with for a while." And then she added sadly, "After all, it's not as if he's going to have any brothers and sisters, is it?" At this, Bertie's father went over to her and kissed her gently on the forehead. It was the only time Bertie had ever seen him kiss her. "All right then," he said. "All right, you can keep your lion." So the white lion cub came to live amongst them in the farmhouse. He slept at the end of Bertie's bed. Wherever Bertie went, the lion cub went too, even to the bathroom, where he would watch Bertie have his bath and lick his legs dry afterwards. They were never apart. It was Bertie who saw to the feeding, milk 4 times a day from one of his father's beer bottles, until later on when the lion cub lapped from a soup bowl. There was impaler meat whenever he wanted it, and as he grew, and he grew fast, he wanted more and more of it. For the first time in his life, Bertie was totally happy. The lion cub was all the brothers and sisters he would ever want, all the friends he could ever need. The two of them would sit side by side on the sofa out on the veranda and watch the great red sun go down over Africa. And Bertie would read him Peter and the Wolf. And at the end, he would always promise him that he would never let him go off to a zoo and live behind bars like the wolf in the story. And the lion cub would look up at Bertie with his trusting amber eyes. "Why don't you give him a name?" his mother asked one day. "Because he doesn't need one," replied Bertie. "He's a lion, not a person. Lions don't need names." Bertie's mother was always wonderfully patient with the lion. No matter how much mess he made, how many cushions he pounced on and ripped apart, no matter how much crockery he smashed, none of it seemed to upset her. And strangely, she was hardly ever ill these days. There was a spring to her step, and her laughter pealed around the house. His father was less happy about it. "Lions," he'd mutter on. Should not live in houses. You should keep him outside in the compound." But they never did. For both mother and son, the lion had brought new life to their days, life and laughter. Okay, I think I'll read one more chapter. It's called Running Free. See it. It was the best year of Bertie's young life, but when it ended more painfully than he could ever have imagined. He'd always known that one day when he was older he would have to go away to school, but he had thought and hoped it would not be for a long time yet. He'd simply put it out of his mind. His father had just returned home from Johannesburg after his yearly business trip. He broke the news at supper time that first evening. Bertie knew there was something in the wind. His mother had been sad again in recent days. Not sick, just strangely sad. She wouldn't look him in the eye, and she winced whenever she tried to smile at him. The lion had just lain down beside him, his head warm on Bertie's feet, when his father cleared his throat and began. It was going to be a bit a lecture. Bertie had had them before often enough, about manners, about being truthful, about the dangers of leaving the compound. "You'll soon be 8, Bertie," he said, "and your mother and I have been doing some thinking. A boy needs a proper education, a good school. Well, we've found just the right place for you, a school near Salisbury in England. Your Uncle George and Aunt Melanie live nearby and have promised to look after you in the holidays and to visit you from time to time. They'll be father and mother to you for a while. You'll get on well with them both, I'm sure you will. They're fine, good people. So you'll be off on the ship to England in July. Your mother will accompany you. She will spend the summer with you in Salisbury. After she's taken you to your school in September, she'll then return here to the farm. It's all arranged." As his heart filled with a terrible dread, all Bertie could think of was his white line. "But the line?" he cried. "What about the line?" "I'm afraid there's something else I have to tell you," his father said, looking across at Bertie's mother, who took a deep breath. And then he told him. He told him he'd met a man whilst he was in Johannesburg, a Frenchman, a circus owner from France. He was over in Africa looking for lions and elephants to buy for his circus. He liked them young, very young, a year or less, so that he could train them up without too much trouble. Besides, they were easier and cheaper to transport when they were young. He would be coming out to the farm in a few days, time to see the white line for himself. If he liked what he saw, he would pay good money and take him away. It was the only time in his life Bertie had ever shouted at his father, "No, no, you can't!" It was rage that wrung the hot tears from him, but they soon gave way to silent tears of sadness and loss. There was no comforting him, but his mother tried all the same. "We can't keep him here forever, Bertie," she said. "We always knew that, didn't we? And you've seen how he stands by the fence gazing out into the veld. You've seen him pacing up and down. But we can't just let him out. He'd be all on his own, no mother to protect him. He couldn't cope. He'd be dead in weeks. You know he would." "But you can't send him to a circus. You can't," said Bertie. "He'll be shut up behind bars." "I promise him he'll never would be. And they'll point at him. They'll laugh at him. He'd rather die. Any animal would." But he knew as he looked across the table at them that it was hopeless, that their minds were quite made up. For Bertie the betrayal was total. That night he made up his mind what had to be done. He waited until he heard his father's deep breathing next door. Then, with his white line at his heels, he crept downstairs in his pyjamas, took down his father's rifle from the rack and stepped out into the night. The compound gate yawned open noisily when he pushed it. But then they were out and running free. Bertie had no thoughts of the danger around him, only that he must get as far away from home as he could before he did it. The lion padded along beside him, stopping every now and again to sniff the air. A clump of trees became a herd of elephants, wandering towards him out of the dawn. Bertie ran for it. He knew how elephants hated lions. He ran and ran till his legs could run no more. As the sun came over the veld, he climbed to the top of the cop and sat down, his arm round the lion's neck. The time had come. "Be wild now," he whispered. "You've got to be wild. Don't come home. Don't ever come home. They'll put you behind bars. You hear what I'm saying? All my life I'll think of you. I promise I will. I will. I won't ever forget you." And he buried his head in the lion's neck and heard the greeting groan from deep inside him. He stood up. "I'm going now," he said. "Don't follow me. Please don't follow me." And Bertie clambered down off the cop and walked away. When he looked back, the lion was still sitting there watching him, but then he stood up, yawned, stretched, licked his lips and sprang down after him. Bertie shouted at him, but he kept coming. He threw sticks, he threw stones, nothing worked. The lion would stop, but then as soon as Bertie walked on, he simply followed at a safe distance. "Go back," Bertie yelled. "You stupid, stupid lion! I hate you! I hate you! Go back!" But the lion kept loping after him, whatever he did, whatever he said. There was only one thing for it. He didn't want to do it, but he had to. With tears filling his eyes and his mouth, he lifted the rifle to his shoulder and fired over the lion's head. At once the lion turned tail and scampered away through the veld. Bertie fired again. He watched till he could see him no more and then turned for home. He knew he'd have to face what was coming to him. Maybe his father would strap him. He threatened it often enough, but Bertie didn't mind. His lion would have his chance for freedom. Maybe not much of one. Anything was better than the bars and whips of a circus. Okay, we'll leave it there. Next chapter is going to be the Frenchman. Okay, hope you've enjoyed that part. Very exciting and sad too. And I shall read the next part soon. Bye for now.